Welcome back to Vibrant Performance TV. Thank you to all the new subscribers who've tuned in to watch me build a sexy 4-inch downpipe for the Speed Academy JDM Legends Supra here. Now, when you're building a bespoke part like this, sometimes there's a little bit of trial and error involved. Through this video, you're gonna see some of those hurdles that I had to overcome to make this 4-inch downpipe and flex fit down underneath the car and provide enough ground clearance and have a wastegate recirculate back into that downpipe at the same time. Let's get started. So Speed Academy wants a 4-inch downpipe on this Supra. That is a lot of pipe to fit in the space that we have available. So I need to transition off of that turbine housing, that flange that we provide with a cone that goes from 3-inch to 4-inch. This is the 3-inch outlet on that turbine housing. This is gonna take up a little bit of real estate as well. This is 4 inches long. That on the end of our downpipe straight to that's not going to work really that well because there's just not that much real estate to make it fit. So what I plan to do is actually split this in half. So by cutting this in half at exactly 2 inches long, it's going to give me a 3-inch to 3.5-inch transition and then another piece that's 3.5 to 4. So what I plan to do is put my 3-inch right on my V-band, transition to 3.5 with this guy, which is a little bit smaller than that, gives me a little bit more real estate. And then I'm gonna take that other transition that I've cut off of this guy and it's gonna go on the bottom. And then that'll get me from my 3.5 up to my 4-inch. And then that's gonna go to the flex by the subframe. And then I also need to add an 1.75-inch tube for the wastegate dump tube to recirculate back into that 4-inch downpipe. If we did initially go with the 4-inch, that is a lot of downpipe to fit in there. Doesn't really fit that well with the transition cone because this piece is going to go right basically on here. If I shorten that, use a smaller 3.5-inch tube, and then I also still need to have room for this 1.75-inch to go down beside it as well. I did already modify this water pipe down here. I've capped it off. That barb's been relocated to the other side. It'll shorten that line and clear up a little more space for our downpipe. Clean that up on the belt sander to get rid of that burr in there. So that is the clamp that comes with the Garrett Turbo. This is a Vibrant universal clamp. The biggest difference is this little quick release clasp that goes over the T-bolt, and it makes getting this apart and back together so much easier because you never have to take that nut completely off and you just close it enough to get the clasp over. So with this, I need to actually open this up far enough to pull that bolt out of there, and it makes it a little more challenging to assemble it back into the vehicle because you don't have that clasp feature. We'll work with it. Our 3.5-inch bend, I'm gonna cut this really close to the tangent point on that bend where the leg starts. Lots of clearance to the firewall behind it, probably shorten it, and then I'll add that other half of that cone to get it back up to 4 inches there. More cuts. And our leg is completely gone. Oh, that looks great. Lots of clearance everywhere. You can see that it's not vertical. It's actually pointing, it's actually leaned a little bit towards the front of the car. I want it to be closer to that. If I hold it like that and I make contact at the top, I can guesstimate what that gap is at the bottom, maybe a little more than 1/4 inch. Take that much more off the top than I am off the bottom so that it pulls that bend that way. Measure once, cut twice. So I'm gonna tack weld this together now with my cone, and then we're gonna lift this up, see what it looks like from underneath. Oh, there we go. Lots of room around that. I just need to shorten it to be able to fit this guy. It's gonna go in there like that, that big flex. All right, let's cut this one now. nice and short, and then we're gonna have our little flare out up to the 4-inch, the other half of this cone, and then it'll be a 4-inch with a little bend. Flex is gonna go somewhere in around here. So that is the other half of our transition cone to get us back up to 4-inch. So I'm just gonna tack weld this piece together, put it back in the car, and then figure out what kind of bend we need between here and our flex. Angle finding app on my phone. Just gonna stick it right inside there. Very close to 45, it's 42 degrees. I'm gonna cut this in half first, and then that's gonna leave me with extra leg there. That's gonna get me really close to where that flex needs to be. Then I can shorten this leg back to the saw. So now I just wanna put this piece up there and kinda get an idea. Yeah, that's gonna have to be made a lot shorter, really close to that subframe. So that's gonna go something like that. And then that'll feed into the catalytic converter and connect up to our 3-inch catback. So I've basically cut almost all the leg off of this 90-degree bend, and that fits in my 4-inch flex nicely. I have nice clearance around the flex. It's really tight through there. That is really snug, but we kind of want to keep ground clearance pretty good, right? And then with that V-band, I've got a little bit of wiggle side to side. Position that, get it nice and centered. The rest of this is the easy part because it's underneath the car. I'm working in just this space here. So next is our wastegate. This wastegate is supposed to clamp onto that V-band. It doesn't really go down all the way. So what I'm gonna do is take this little piece of Schedule 10 pipe and weld it directly onto the manifold. So that'll raise it up, so it'll give it this clearance that we need here and here. It's a nice piece. For a cast manifold, it's really, really nice. I'm gonna put this on a hot plate to preheat it. While that's warming up, I am going to weld my flange to my little extension pipe. It's probably gonna take a couple hours. To weld my flange to my little piece of scheduled pipe, I don't want this flange to warp, so I'm going to clamp it to a nice little solid aluminum heat sink that I've got here. Oh, it's a fabulous Friday for welding. So I'm just gonna clean up the inside of this pipe where I welded before I weld the inside. Did Peter and Dave say they wanted a screamer pipe out the hood? I can't remember, like right in the driver's view? No, I guess that's not gonna work. We wanna recirculate this so that all the exhaust goes out the back of the car. So this is gonna have to tuck in here and merge with our downpipe. I'm gonna try and keep as close to the flex as I can. If I really wanted to get fancy, I could have it come over and go over this side like that, but that's maybe a little bit extra. I'm gonna add a 1 3/4 V-band further downstream, where just ahead of the merge, so that this can come off as a separate piece to the downpipe, so it makes assembly a little bit easier. So I need to be able to fit this 1 3/4 V-band assembly down in this space here somewhere, and then I'm gonna have a a hardliner bellows there that's going to act as an expansion joint for any kind of thermal cycling that it's going to see. That's going to feed down there. This is my flex coupler that's going to live in that space there to allow a little bit of flexibility. V-band assembly I want to have so that I can take this little pipe assembly out separately from the downpipe to make it easier to assemble everything. So this little V-band has to live somewhere in this space here. And I'm going to have my merge go into this space down here where I remove this hose barb down here from this water pipe. So I've got all this space in here to fit that. So basically all I want to do now is just basically draw a line on the side of my downpipe that's center line of where that slash cut's going to go. All these bellows are passivated and electropolished, 321 stainless. That's why it looks all nice and shiny. And there's no welds on these, so you're just going to insert that tube in there and then just do a lap joint weld to install that. This is just a cap ring that captures all the layers, that inner liner and then the bellows ply. And they are flow directional. They're open on the exit side, so you can see that little bit of wiggle there. And then on the entry side, it's just a small step. Now there's a couple of different ways you could go about doing this. Slash cuts are never fun to make. They can be challenging, especially if you don't have the right tools. Plasma cutter is always really helpful and easy to use when you're trying to make a complex shape on a piece of pipe. Or you could use an angle grinder with a zip disc, a little noisier, a little more messy. Determining the slash cut itself, some people like to use part of a bend. I like to do it so that it's a piece of straight pipe going into that slash cut. So I've got a UJ bend here. I could use the slash cut on this part of the bend and then cut it here so that I've got a nice straight merge coming straight up, and then my slash cut is on the actual straight part of the pipe. If I were to do it on the 45, that makes it a little more complex, and that transition into the downpipe from the wastegate isn't as smooth as if it were a straight section going into that slash cut. So how do you figure out how to cope this so that it has that slash on it? So I know there's some tools and stuff that you can get that help make life easier. In a lot of cases, I'll just use a piece of cardboard tube, and I'm gonna split this, wrap it around that, shape it into this cope with just a pair of scissors until I get it a nice tight fit, and then I'm gonna transfer that onto my pipe, and then I'm gonna cut the pipe. I'll just basically split it, and that allows me to go over top of that. Okay. I'll just split it and cut myself a piece, and then that allows me to wrap it around that. I'll have a little bit of a gap there, but I can guesstimate what that's gonna be when I make that slash cut. So I probably want this a little bit longer because I want a nice gradual merge into that downpipe. So that's my starting point. Now I just need to do a little bit of shaping to get that cope. Cut this piece off, split it, wrap it around my pipe, and then that's gonna give me a more accurate indication of what that needs to look like. So there's a bit of a gap here, so that means I need to remove some of that corner there. I've just taped it to the pipe just to check one final time, make sure it's nice and tight with little to no gaps. And I think I can make that work. Now I just need to transfer it onto my UJ bend somewhere in this area to make sure that I'm able to keep this V-band clearanced enough from the pipe so that I can actually open it and take the clamp off. So I need to have enough clearance to be able to pull that off of that flange. So that's that distance that I need from the pipe to there. So I've got about 20 millimeters from the inside of this flange to the outside of that clamp. Keep this pipe inch away from here. I should be safe to make that work. So that's about center, and that can come up quite a bit. That's a little bit more than 1 inch. Now I'm gonna cut this so that I stay away from the line, and then I'll trim to the line. I gotta cut this here now so I can continue. Pretty close with just a straight cut. I'm gonna put my template back on there, and then I'll just need to remove a bit of material on the sharp side and a little bit on the inside. Showing a little bit of material needs to come off here and on the inside as well. So now I've got my cope all shaped. It's got that nice scallop for that 4-inch diameter tube. And my V-band should have lots of clearance. I don't know that it's gonna be that long. I might have to cut this back shorter. Time to test fit my little coping. This is gonna be coming down from our dump tube there, something like that. I think that'll work. I'm just gonna continue marking this around my pipe. Then I'm gonna break out the plasma cutter and cut this hole. So I've got my hole marked where we're gonna use our plasma cutter to cut that hole so that we can put our nice little merge on there. I've broken the tack welds on this. I just need to pull this flex off to make sure that our plasma doesn't spray any slag or anything onto that interlock inner liner. And I'm also gonna use this little half piece of round that I cut, and I'm gonna slide that inside there so that it acts as a catch for all that slag. So when you're cutting that hole, it sprays and catches on there rather than the inside of that pipe. Pull this apart. That fits nicely in there. And now I can cut my hole. So that's all the stuff we don't want on the inside of our pipe. I caught a lot of it. So I have now cleaned up my hole. Merge pipe here is all coped and fitted together nicely. I've got a small little piece of tape here to hold this in place so I could just tack weld this and then test it in the car. I haven't welded this flange on yet. I'm gonna just kind of stick it on there once I get it in the car to make sure everything's good. Clearance is good around it. I'll be able to get the clamp off and on. And then I'm gonna pull it back out of the car, break it apart. I'm gonna weld this flange onto this merge pipe, and I'll clamp this to my heat sink so it's not gonna warp that flange. And then I'll put that assembly back on and I'll weld it all together and get this thing back in the car. The other thing you wanna keep in mind when you make a merge like this is that you gotta have access to be able to weld all the way around the whole thing. So if this pipe was really close to my downpipe, I wouldn't be able to get my torch in here to weld it very easily. And I can use an extended cup if I need to get access to an area that's a little tighter. So that flange is gonna sit right on that pipe like that. So now I just need to make this assembly from the wastegate to that pipe. So I've welded up the downpipe and I've welded this flange onto our wastegate recirculation branch. Now I've got a piece of tape just kind of acting as my third hand to hold this in place. I'm gonna put a couple of tack welds, then I'm gonna back purge this whole thing, fill it up with argon, and finish this weld here. So I've got my back purge feeding in from the bottom of this pipe. Because the argon is heavier than oxygen, it'll push all the oxygen out the top here. I've got this one plugged, so I want to just fill all this up. So I'll let this sit for a little while it fills up with argon. So now this should be the easiest part, is mating my wastegate to that branch. And I'm gonna do that with just a 90, this flex and the flange. And my flex is gonna live somewhere here. And it is flow directional, so I wanna make sure that the exit side is the open side. So there's two different ways I could do this. This is gonna flow much better than that. This is what's left over from my UJ bend, where I use the 45-degree angle to merge into our downpipe. The difference is with this, I will not really need to add any leg to it when I weld it. So it'll be fewer welds, whereas this, if I cut it in half here, I'm gonna need to add a bit of straight on one side or the other. But this will flow a bit better, but it's a wastegate dump tube, so it's not really critical. It looks like it might actually look a little more aesthetically pleasing because the radius of this is a closer match to the radius of that. Whereas this is a much tighter radius and it might look a little strange. You know, you want it to look pretty when you look under the hood. So I've split my 180 in half. I've got one with a little bit longer leg, one with a little bit shorter leg. I'm gonna keep this and put it in my offcut bin. I can use that for a project somewhere later on down the road. And I'm just gonna sit this inside that flange. And I want to now determine how much I need to take off of that leg. Put a steel ruler across there, 80 millimeter to the top. So I'm gonna take, well, not 80 millimeter, I'll go maybe 75, leave a little bit on just in case I'm a little bit off. And then I'll come back, test it again, and then I'll need to add this flex with a little bit of straight coming out of the wastegate and add the flange and we're done. Almost every time you make a cut, you're gonna have debris inside your pipe. After I've deburred the inside, I usually just take a rag and push it through to get any of that metal shavings and stuff out of the pipe. You want it nice and clean in there. You don't want any of that stuff going through that catalytic converter that's gonna be downstream of all this piping. Glad I cut that short. So now I just need a piece in between here, about 2.5 inches. Yep, just a little bit has to come off it. Okay, let's tack weld flanges to the pipes. I've attached my wastegate dump to the wastegate, and then I'm just gonna fit that in like that. Adjust this so that I can spin this freely by hand. That is a completely relaxed state. It shouldn't be taking up part of a bend. It shouldn't be installed in a state of tension. Just gonna tack weld this in a couple spots, and then I'll be able to take my ground clamp off, pull the assembly out, and continue on the bench. When I weld this bellows, I want to make sure I capture all the layers all the way from the tube all the way up to that outer cap ring, but not put too much heat into it because you can risk melting the thin bellows ply layer away from behind that cap ring. And if that melts away, you're going to end up with an exhaust leak coming out behind that cap ring here. So the next step on this downpipe is to put this flex bellows back in place. I know that it's gonna fit where I have this downpipe all welded together. There's two schools of thought in regards to welding these. Now, some people like to fuse all the layers. There's your interlock liner on the inside, and then you've got that braid wire, and then that outer cap ring. And the bellows ply is also in those layers as well. They're all kind of sandwiched together. So some people like to just fuse them all together, and then you'll take your pipe and insert it and do a lap joint weld. Some people prefer just to insert the pipe and do a lap joint weld without that step of fusing all those layers ahead of time. I'm gonna do one side, I'm gonna fuse all the layers. The other side, I'm gonna do it the other way, and we'll see what kind of results we get. Go in there, something like that. And then our catalytic converter is gonna live somewhere in this area because looks like I have the biggest space available there. But I'm also gonna start building from here to bring it over to that cat. Peter and Dave have provided us with a cat back exhaust that's already on the car. It has a 2-bolt flange. Vibrant has a variety of 2-bolt, 3-bolt, 4-bolt oval flanges. I would love to switch this to a V-band. That's always my preferred flange, just because it just makes mock-up a lot easier and you don't need a gasket in between it. We need to transition from 4-inch down to that 3-inch. So I'm gonna use another one of our 2632 transition combs. That's just gonna go on the end of that like that. And then I'm gonna start building this way towards the downpipe. We're gonna have our cat sit in between there. So welding the other side of this flex bellows, I'm gonna be doing it where it hasn't been fused. So I'm gonna start my puddle on my tubing. As it starts to form, I'm gonna add filler and wash that puddle up to the outer cap ring, making sure that I capture all those layers in between and not putting too much heat into it because I don't wanna melt that bellows ply layer away, because again, I can end up with a leak behind that cap ring and between the outer braid wire. Just making sure I capture that outer cap ring. Lots of filler, not rushing it. Watching the edges of my pool. Keep everything nice and smooth. Troy, what sound does the wastegate make when it opens?
Whoa! Awesome, 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 awesome.
Okay, so our wastegate little dump tube here is all finished. Just gonna install it now. Connect it with these V-bands. Hopefully I can do it without dropping any hardware into the engine bay. I've got the top half of the downpipe all figured out. Now it's time to figure out this bottom section. I've got an offcut from a 90-degree bend that I had used for part of the top part. I've got my 4-inch catalytic converter. This piece actually fits nicely into my flex here, and then my cat's gonna live here. And then I just need to finish that little offset bend into our cat back. I've got a couple of support stands here to help me act as a second set of hands so I can continue on. So I'm just gonna take this over to the tubing expander, blow that up a little bit so it's a little snug fit and make a much nicer weld. I don't wanna go too much higher because then it's gonna be really close to that passenger footwell. Actually, sorry, driver footwell, right-hand drive here. So a couple of unused pieces from the downpipe I thought I was gonna use, didn't. Pretty close to where I want it to be. It's a little long. If I swap this around, it makes it shorter. But I need a little less bend. So if I take off maybe 3/4 of an inch here and a 1/4 inch on the inside, then that should get me really close to where I need to be with this. Lots of clearance. This looks like it might not be quite enough bend. It's 6 3/8 there and 7 inches there. So I need this to have a little bit more bend to it. So my 180s, gonna plug in there like that. So I'm just gonna cut it here And if I have to cut a little more off, that's okay. I'd rather do that than have to add something after the cut. My ichrometer is not bad. The angle is really good, but it's just a little bit long on this side. Take a little bit more off of this bend, and I think I'll still have length left here to make this piece work. And when I do get this fitted nicely, I'm gonna try and keep the end that goes into the cat here. This is the exit side. I want to keep that as short as possible. I don't want it sticking into that cone past this straight length here. Because if I do that, then it becomes a flow restriction. And we don't want that in our exhaust. So I'll just clean this up on the belt sander. I'm also gonna make this a little bit back to round before I do that though. I'm just gonna do that in the arbor press over here. Squeeze it a little bit back from oval to round. I haven't tack welded this section to the flex yet because I wanted to do this all separately. So now I can tack weld this together, pull this section out of the car, weld it on the bench. That saves me the time of having to pull the whole thing off as an assembly. My torch holder is made by Hourglass Ingenuity. And what's really nice about this is it doesn't have to live just on your bench. Stick it here so that it's close by and I don't have to pick it up off the floor. I don't have to have it hanging over. I know it's gonna be secure there. It's not gonna come out and break my expensive Furic Pyrex cup. So I'm wrapping these with some painter's tape. We don't get any argon that I'm purging in here escape out the welds that I'm not working on yet. Argon's a little heavier than oxygen, so I'm gonna kind of try and keep this side elevated so that the argon stays down here and my vent is at this side. And I'm gonna wipe everything down with some acetone to get a nice, clean, strong weld. So Peter and Dave want an O2 sensor after the flex, before the cat. I've got our 1188 saddle style O2 bung. I really like these weld bungs because it has a nice coped saddle on it. It's got a little step there for when you drill your hole, and if you're a little bit, you make a mistake or the hole's a little bit off, that flange of the saddle is gonna cover that hole really nicely. All right, let's tack weld this, and then we can pull it out of the car and finish that final weld, and this downpipe is out of my hair. So much hair. So on this side of the bellows, I have fused all those layers together. So making this weld, the second weld, will be much easier, and I don't have to worry as much about capturing all the layers because they are already fused together. But I also want to make sure I don't put too much heat into this weld because it can still cause some potential issues with that thin bellows ply layer. Certainly the largest downpipe I've ever welded together, but I think it turned out okay. I did face some challenges. I originally wanted to keep this cone all one piece, 4 inches long. That would have meant I would have had to have pie cuts coming down, and then it would have moved this further back to the firewall, and I wouldn't have had room for my recirculation dump tube there. By changing this from cutting it in half and putting a little bit of 3.5 inch in between, it actually allowed me to move that downpipe away from the firewall to allow this recirc to come down. I've done the flex 2 different ways. This is welded without fusing This side is welded with fusing. And we've got a catalytic converter and then another transition cone where it goes back to 3-inch to that catback exhaust. Oh, look at that, eh? Not bad, not bad. Sweet. So I've got this wastegate recirculating dump tube all welded up and in. The main reason why I've put this bellows in here is because the exhaust coming out of the turbine housing and the exhaust coming out of the wastegate, with them being also 2 different size pipes, they're gonna be growing at different speeds. So one might be expanding at a faster rate than the other. So this bellows is going to allow for that difference of expansion and contraction because it is welded as a recirculation down into that downpipe. And I want to make sure that there's a little bit of wiggle room, and that flex bellows is going to allow for that and make sure that all the welds live a long, happy life, making lots of boost. Thanks for tuning in as I made this beautiful 4-inch downpipe for Project JDM Legend Supra for Speed Academy. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You've seen the spice. Tune in for the ice. Greg's gonna tackle the charge pipe and intercooler next.